Hello folks, I'm Trev Makes It Easy, the channel where we make learning easy. In this series, Trev on Econ, I'll be taking you through topics you're likely to run into in any introductory course in economics at the college or university level. My goal is to make economics less scary, more approachable, and, if I can, mildly enjoyable. With that being said, let's make it easy. All right, folks, let's get started. Today we're starting a new block of lessons dealing with probably one of the most fundamental forces in all of economics, demand and supply. This is one of those things that when people come into economics, they first think of things like demand and supply. It's one of the things you've heard about in your day-to-day life, on the news, wherever, but probably haven't taken the time to really study it and understand what it is we're dealing with. Now, in this lesson, we're going to deal with demand and supply on their own, but at the same time. And the reason I want to do this is you're going to see that they're very similar forces, just operating in opposite directions. And having that connection will make pattern recognition easier, so you don't have to memorize every single fact about this and can focus on the base meaning and then using your critical thinking to find the other piece. My recommendation, pick demand or supply, learn everything about it, and just understand the opposite is just that, the opposite. So I like to use green for demand. I have no real reason for that. It's just something I've picked up over the years. But demand, what is demand? Well, demand is a reflection of buyers. So this is the buyer side. And their desire, let's say willingness, and ability to pay. What I mean by that is that the buyers have to have two key components. They have to have a willingness or sort of a want to buy something, and they also have to have the ability to pay for that thing. This is very important to understand, but you can't just want something and call it demand. Demand is a little more strict than that. Demand requires both a want as well as a means to achieve that. So, for example, I make whatever money I make, but if I want, the newest sports car, I might have a willingness to buy it, but I probably don't have that ability to pay. So do I demand the sports car? No, but I do want it. So again, want and demand are not the same thing. Now, like I said, everything in this chapter is about reflection or opposition. So when I do the note for supply, well, supply is just the reflection of sellers and their willingness and ability to sell. Again, just like the buyers, it is a combination not just of a want to sell, but also an ability to sell, meaning they have to be able to make that amount of thing, or they have to be able to meet some sort of demand or quota or whatever their sort of responsibility is. So for the sellers, they might have a willingness to sell, which if I spelt it right, there we go, but they must also have the ability. A company might want to sell 1 million units, but if their capacity is 100,000, they just don't have that ability. And because of that, they run into an issue of maybe wanting to sell, but not actually being able to supply. It's a minor difference, but we're going to find out a lot, and especially in later lessons in this section, that the wording we use is important and that certain words are used in specific places with specific meanings, and you have to be a little careful about when we use what word. So, with demand and supply are going to be based around a very simple relationship, and that relationship is price and quantity. We are going to see these two terms a lot. So price we just call P, and quantity we call Q. You might have heard people say mind your P's and Q's. Kind of relates to this. So price and quantity are going to be our forces that are interacting to determine demand and supply. Now, when we talk about demand, we'll usually say quantity demanded. When we talk about supply, we will usually say quantity supplied. When we're not really talking about either in particular, we'll usually just use the word quantity, which is pretty commonplace. Now, before we dive too much into this relationship, we have to understand that between price and quantity, all right, price is the independent variable, which if you're not quite sure what that means, it just means the one that businesses have control of. This is the thing that they are able to manipulate. They are able to raise it, to lower it, to incite some sort of change in behavior. All right. Now, what that behavioral change is going to be one of the main focuses of today, but we have to understand that they have control over price, but they don't have control over quantity. All right. So what we say is that quantity is the dependent variable, and this is the variable that changes when we change price. So you can kind of think of it as cogs. So if you know, cogs are those things that turn, or gears as some people call them. They have teeth and they interact like this. Well, price is the cog that I am able to spin. It's got a handle and I'm able to spin the price cog or gear. And when I spin that, it's naturally going to make the other one spin with it or against it, depending on what we're looking at. But I can't just look at quantity and say, oh, well, let me just adjust that. I don't have that control. All right. Price is the thing I can control. Quantity is sort of the result of me changing the price. I will often draw this picture for students where basically we just say P can change Q, but Q cannot change P. Okay. We are going to focus on the one-way relationship. All right. The unidirectional, we sometimes call it. Now, this is important to understand because a lot of students get this confused and they'll be like, oh, well, I'll just change the quantity and that'll raise price, or I'll just change the quantity and that will change price the other way. Not how it works. All right. We change price, that changes quantity. I cannot change quantity to change price, just the rules. All right. So if these are going to be our variables of interest, how do they interact? Well, let's scroll down a bit and talk about two little charts. The first is demand. So if I'm looking at demand, I would be looking at price, which again is P, and quantity demanded. Usually we'll call this Q with a little d on it. Now, I can charge different price levels, right? I can charge 0, I can charge 1, 2, 3, 4, just to keep it simple. And how much I demand at these different price levels is going to be determined by, well, what the price level is. So maybe at $0, which is not super realistic, but maybe at $0, I'm willing to buy 10 of these things, right? At $0, I'll take 10. I don't need more than that. I'm happy with 10. That's just how it is. But if you raise the price to $1, pause the video and ask yourself, what do you think is going to happen to quantity demanded? And the thing is a lot of the time you can just ask yourself, what would I do? Right? If the price went up, am I going to buy more than 10 or try and buy less than 10, do you think? Most people understand that as price goes up, I am willing to buy less. Okay? So price goes up, I buy less. 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 Right? This is what we call a demand schedule. And a demand schedule is just the data representation of P and Q. Right? It's actually very similar to what we saw when we did the PPF, if you've seen that video, but it's again just looking at as one variable changes, what happens to the other one. Now, you'll notice here we get this sort of action, whereas one variable goes up, the other goes down. This has a very specific name in mathematics, and it is called an inverse relationship, which means one goes one way, one goes the other. Now, to formalize this a bit more, we use what's called the law of demand. And the law of demand simply states that as price increases, quantity demanded decreases. It is not a very complex law, right? Now, we should quickly take a side note here. A law in economics, or really any science, is something that can't be disproven. Now, in economics, that's very hard to do because when you're dealing with people, a lot of the time, people behave in unique ways, and coming up with a rule that works for every single person everywhere at every time is very tricky. Now, in something like physics, this is very easy, right? In physics, you have the law of gravity, law of thermodynamics, law of energy conservation. In economics, we have very few laws, and the reason is it's hard to come up with laws. So when we do have laws, they're usually very simple. Something like, as price goes up, we buy less stuff. That is something we can pretty much universally say is probably true. Again, even then, there might be some strange scenario where that's not, but for most part, we are happy to accept that and say that is a law that we're going to abide by. Now, again, we're going to keep up the same idea, but this time for supply. Now, the same variables are going to apply. We've got price, which is P. We have, this time, quantity supplied, which again, we're just going to say QS. And we're going to make up some prices. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? The tricky part for supply and demand, especially at the start, is remembering to basically switch hats. When I'm looking at demand, I'm a buyer. And as a buyer, I have certain wants and needs and things I'm trying to fulfill. When I look at supply, it's the opposite situation. I still have wants, desires, and needs I'm trying to fulfill, but they're very different from what a buyer wants. All right, so switching that hat and remembering who you are in the scenario is going to be integral. So what happens here is this. Again, pretend you're a seller of something. Someone tells you you can sell this thing for $0. How many are you going to want to sell? Well, if I can only sell it for $0, that's a really terrible deal for me. So I might actually just not sell any, right? The quantity I'm going to supply is 0. But as you bump it up to 1, maybe I sell some. But as you bump it up even more, I sell more and more and more. You'll notice the prices are the same, but the behavior of the quantities is not the same, right? Now, what's this one called? Well, you can probably guess this is a supply schedule, right? And again, it's another data representation of P and Q. Now, this one doesn't go in opposite directions. This one goes together. When the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. When the price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. This is also a relationship style. This is what we call a direct relationship. And you would probably not be surprised to know that there's also a law of supply, which is as price increases, quantity supplied increases. Now, again, be very careful of the wording, right? Over here, it's increase, decrease to reflect that relationship, where over here, it's increase, increase to reflect that other relationship. You need to be careful. Again, wording is going to be important. Now, the last thing we're going to do is now we have to put this on a graph, okay? That is our end goal here because supply and demand is heavily graphing based. Now, I'm going to clear out some of this wording here just to free up some space and keep the data up. But our graphs are going to start in the same position they did last time. We've got X and Y axis. All right. Let's copy that over to the other side as well. And our first step is always, let's label the axes. So this is a little odd, and this screws up people who have a math background. In most mathematics, the x-axis, or the one that's horizontal like this down here, is the independent variable. So in most maths and sciences, the independent variable goes down here, which would be p, which means the dependent variable would go on the y-axis, which would be q. The problem is economics does the opposite. All right, so down here is actually going to be our quantity. And it's going to be up top where we have our price. Now, I don't have a great explanation for this. The explanation I was told when I was coming up in school was because economics was struggling at being like the middle child of hard sciences like bio, physics, chemistry, and soft sciences like sociology, criminology, psychology, etc. So economics found itself in this middle ground, and they said, well, I want to differentiate myself, so let's just flip them. I genuinely don't know if that's the real answer. I've never really looked into it. If you know the true story, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. But we have price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal. Now, how do we graph it? Well, remember, as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. So at high prices, I have very little quantity. But as the price goes down, the quantity gets bigger and we get our demand curve. Now you'll notice that I didn't really plot the points out. Again, at this level, we're just interested in directional relationships. So as long as it has the shape of going downward, we're usually pretty happy. I would say, unless otherwise stated, a 45-degree angle is probably the safest bet for later things. There will come a time where we can play around with the slope a bit, but for now, I'd probably keep it at 45. All right. One way I like to remember this is demand is downward, so D and D, demand D, downward D. Simple, but again, it's so easy to screw up the directions in the early stages that you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble and silly mistakes if you can just get the direction right. Now, supply is going to do something different. You'll remember that as price gets higher, the quantity supplied also gets higher. So that means that at low prices, we have low quantity, and as price rises, we get more quantity, which means we get a curve that looks like this. And we end up with our supply curve. Now, just like demand, again, this will always be upward sloping. Demand is always downward, supply is always upward. I used to not have a great way to remember this or teach students, but a simple one is just supply has the word up in it, right? It's up in the word, so the curve goes up. That is going to be our first little introduction to demand and supply. This is definitely going to be one of our longer topics, if not the longest topic, because it's such a fundamental force for literally anything else we want to do in economics, whether it be micro or macro. It's important to understand these fundamentals and really commit these to memory and understanding, as they are going to be very useful for pretty much the life of your economics career. With that being said, I hope you'll join me next time when we start to dissect this a little further. Until then, bye-bye. Well, folks, that wraps up another lesson for today. I hope it was helpful. If you found the video valuable, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions about the content or requests for other topics or subjects you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment below. Until next time, keep learning and make it easy.